The luminous pearl was not a restaurant. It was a theorem proving that wealth could warp the laws of physics. Within its walls, bathed in the soft, honeyed glow of 1,000 hidden lights, sound traveled differently. The clink of crystal was a form of music. Conversation was a low, conspiratorial hum, and the frantic chaos of the city outside was a forgotten rumor. For the clientele, it was a decompression chamber from the pressures of ordinary existence. For Monica Fletcher, it was a high-wire act performed over a canyon of debt, a nightly ballet of calculated deference and muscle memory grace. At 23, Monica moved through the opulent space with a poise that was a deliberate act of war against the exhaustion that had taken root in her very marrow. Her reality was a third-floor walk-up in a neighborhood where the primary color was rust, and the dominant scent was a mix of diesel fumes and damp concrete. It was a world defined by the stack of final notices on her kitchen counter, each one a paper tombstone for her late grandfather's final, brutal fight with an illness that had consumed his savings, and then her own. Each perfectly plated filet mignon she delivered, each effervescent flute of champagne she poured, was a tiny, almost insulting chip against a mountain of debt that felt geological in scale. She was an invisible cog in the magnificent, gilded clockwork of other people's lives, her own dreams packed away like old photographs, fading in the dark. Tonight, the queen of this particular jungle was Serena Hale. At 23, Serena was the sole inheritor of the Hale Dynamics empire, a global titan of advanced robotics and logistical AI. Her father, Damian Hale, had built the company from a garage blueprint and a relentless, almost terrifying force of will. Serena, however, had inherited only the dividends, not the discipline. She wore her privilege not like a cloak, but like a weapon. Her dress was a shimmering cascade of emerald green sequins that cost more than Monica's grandfather had made in his last year of life, and the diamonds encircling her throat and wrist didn't sparkle. They issued cold, arrogant glares. She held court in the restaurant's most coveted corner booth, flanked by two sycophants, a vapid real estate heir named Julian, and a woman named Chloe, whose profession seemed to be a full-time dedication to agreeing with Serena. Honestly, the gall of some people, Serena was saying, her voice polished to a weaponized sharpness. She gestured with a dismissive flick of her wrist toward a quiet, elderly couple at a nearby table. "Did you see his watch? A vintage Longines. It's lovely, of course, but it's a manual wind. Can you imagine the effort? In this day and age, it's practically performance art. So terribly quaint," Julian chuckled, the sound thin and obsequious. "A relic, Serena. The world is automated now, thanks to visionaries like your father." "And you, of course," Chloe added, angling her phone to capture the perfect, self-satisfied glint in Serena's eye for her social media feed. Monica approached the table, her professional smile a masterpiece of psychological engineering, a mask molded and fired in the kiln of 1,000 slights. She had trained herself to be a functional part of the ambiance, to hear the casual cruelty of her patrons as background noise, like the distant traffic. But tonight, the words had edges. Perhaps it was the letter from the hospice care facility that had arrived that morning, its tone of polite but unyielding finality, feeling like a hand closing around her throat. "Good evening. May I take your order, or would you care for another bottle of the Sancerre?" Monica's voice was a calm, practiced melody, designed to be heard but not listened to. Serena didn't grant her a glance. Her attention was fixed on the intricate, skeletonized clock on the far wall, a marvel of brass and glass gears that was the restaurant's namesake pearl. "I sealed the Axiom partnership today," she announced, her voice pitched just loud enough for the surrounding tables to register her triumph. Father said it was a long shot. He said old man Petrov was a dinosaur who wouldn't trust his logistics to an AI, wouldn't trust the future. She took a victorious sip of her wine. Turns out even dinosaurs can be bought. He practically bowed when I presented the final offer. A true titan, Serena. Just like Damian, Julian cooed, raising his glass. Monica's eyes, against her will, were drawn to Serena's wrist. The diamond bracelet was a supernova of light, but nestled beside it was a watch. It was a brand Monica knew well, a modern minimalist piece from a fashionable Swiss house, known more for its marketing budget than its mechanical integrity. As Serena gestured again, Monica noticed it had stopped. The second hand was still. It was a quartz movement, the battery likely dead. A small, involuntary impulse, a need to correct, to fix, to make things right, twitched in her. It was the ghost of her grandfather's hands on her own. As she refilled Serena's water glass, the motion brought her closer, and Serena finally deigned to acknowledge her existence. "What is it?" she snapped, noticing Monica's fleeting glance. "Are you admiring my watch? I suppose it costs more than your entire education." "My apologies, miss," Monica said, her gaze immediately dropping, the professional mask snapping back into place. "It's a beautiful piece." Serena smirked, sensing an opportunity for a demonstration. "Of course it is. It's the latest model. The best. It tells the time. That's what matters, isn't it?" "Yes, miss." "Of course," Monica murmured. But the words were a lie, and the lie felt like a betrayal of the man who had raised her. She thought of her grandfather, Emile, in his small, sun-drenched workshop that always smelled of oil, brass, and pipe tobacco. He was a man who saw the universe in the spin of an escape wheel, a man who could coax life back into a century-old movement with the gentle patience of a saint. He had taught her that a watch wasn't about telling time. It was about honoring it. The moment should have passed. It was just another casual cruelty in a long night of them. But Serena, emboldened by her audience and her wine, pressed the advantage. "It's about precision, efficiency. My father built an empire on it. Things that are old and complicated, like that ridiculous clock on the wall, are just inefficient. They're obsolete." That was the spark. The word obsolete landed like a physical blow. Monica thought of her grandfather's gnarled fingers, the way they could manipulate a hairspring thinner than a human hair, the quiet dignity of his craft, a lifetime of skill concentrated in the delicate dance of his hands. That wasn't obsolete. That was eternal. "Actually," Monica heard herself say, the single word an act of rebellion she hadn't planned, "it's not about efficiency. That's a LeCoultre Atmos clock. It's a masterpiece of perpetual motion. It's powered by minute changes in atmospheric temperature. A single degree of change can power it for 2 days. It doesn't need to be bought or sold or even wound. It lives. It breathes with the room." A profound, chilling silence descended upon the table. Julian and Chloe looked as if they had just witnessed a talking salt shaker. Serena's face, which had been flushed with the smug warmth of her own importance, slowly drained of colour, replaced by the pale, cold fury of a monarch whose authority had just been questioned by a court jester. It wasn't just that the waitress had spoken out of turn. It was that she had spoken with an authority that was serene, absolute, and utterly dismissive of Serena's entire worldview. She had, in front of her acolytes, corrected her. Serena's eyes, the colour of a winter sky, narrowed. "Did I ask for a lecture on antique junk from the hired help?" she hissed, her voice a low, venomous whisper that was more frightening than a shout. Monica's heart began to hammer, a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She could feel the laser-like gaze of the manager, Peter Caldwell, from across the room, a palpable wave of his impending panic washing over her. "No, miss. I apologize. I overstepped." But it was too late. The affront was too public. Serena's humiliation demanded a sacrifice. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" She spat, her voice trembling with rage. "Standing there in your cheap little uniform, judging your betters. Let me teach you a lesson about the real world, a world where things have a price." With a movement that was both languid and vicious, she picked up her half-full glass of Sancerre. She didn't toss it. She didn't spill it. She flung it, a deliberate, contemptuous arc of pale gold liquid that splashed across the front of Monica's crisp white blouse. A collective, horrified gasp rippled through the hushed dining room. The wine, cold and smelling sharply of citrus and spite, soaked through the thin fabric instantly, clinging to her skin. A few drops spattered onto the simple, steel-cased watch she wore, a modest, unadorned timepiece from the 1960s. It had been her grandfather's first creation after arriving in America, the watch he had built with his own hands to prove his skill. It was the only thing of his she had left. Monica stood frozen, the shock of the act momentarily paralyzing her. The world contracted to the ugly, spreading stain on her chest, and the smug, triumphant sneer on Serena Hale's face. The murmur of conversation ceased. The clatter of forks died. In the ringing, absolute silence, Monica looked down at her grandfather's watch, a single drop of white wine clinging to the crystal like a tear. And in that instant, or something inside her, a retaining wall built of practiced patience and financial desperation, did not just crack. It shattered. The fear, the grief, the crushing, relentless weight of her life, it all coalesced into a single point of cold, diamond-hard clarity. She slowly lifted her eyes. The mask of deference was gone, incinerated. For the first time, Serena Hale was seeing not a waitress, not a functionary, but a person. And in that person's eyes, she saw an abyss of contempt. Monica's voice, when she finally spoke, was quiet, almost conversational. Yet it cut through the silent room with the chilling precision of a scalpel. "This wine," she began, her tone analytical, "is a Puilly Fumé, from a respectable but not exceptional vintage. A glass costs this restaurant, perhaps $7 to procure. You've paid $45 for it. The difference is the price of sitting in this room." She gently, almost tenderly, touched the face of her own wine-spattered watch. "This watch," she continued, her voice gaining a resonant strength that captivated the room, "is a Fletcher. You've never heard of it. Only one was ever made. My grandfather built it. He fled his home with nothing but the clothes on his back and the knowledge in his hands. He built this movement piece by piece, by hand, at a small wooden desk in a rented room. He used it to prove he was a master of his craft. He valued it not for its price, it has none, but for the integrity of its design and the honesty of the labor required to give it life." She lifted her gaze and locked it onto Serena's. "That diamond bracelet on your wrist, Miss Hale, is worth $250,000. But its movement is a cheap, mass-produced quartz module from a factory in Shenzhen that costs about $5 to make. It has a battery that dies. You possess a great deal of wealth, but you are wearing a beautiful, expensive, and ultimately empty case. It seems you have a talent for acquiring things of high price, but you don't seem to have a single thing of any actual value." Without waiting for a reply, without a glance at the stunned manager now rushing toward her, Monica turned with a crisp, deliberate motion and walked away. She left behind a dining room frozen in shock, a puddle of expensive wine soaking into the Aubusson carpet, and an heiress who, for the first time in her insulated, gilded life, had been publicly and surgically disassembled by the truth. She didn't see Peter Caldwell bowing and scraping at Serena's table, his face a mask of frantic apology. She didn't hear Serena, her voice a shrill shriek of pure rage, demanding her immediate termination. Monica was already in the staff locker room, her hands shaking so violently she could barely unfasten the clasp of her grandfather's watch. She cradled it in her palm, wiping the wine from its crystal with a desperate, loving tenderness. The tears wouldn't come. She was too empty, too utterly burned out for tears. The firing was as swift and impersonal as a guillotine. "We cannot have staff creating a hostile environment for our guests, Monica," Caldwell said, refusing to meet her eyes, his own gaze fixed on a wine stain on his blotter. "The Hales are pillars of this community." "She assaulted me," Monica stated, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "You embarrassed a patron," he countered, sliding her final paycheck across the desk. It was an amount so laughably small, it wouldn't even cover the interest on her grandfather's final hospital bill. It was a dismissal sealed with an insult. The long bus ride home was a smear of neon and rain against the grimy window. Each light was a distant, indifferent star in a galaxy of other people's lives. She trudged up the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment, the familiar scent of old building and quiet desperation greeting her like a shroud. She looked at the threatening stack of bills on her small kitchen table, and the crushing reality of her situation finally landed. She had stood up for herself, for her grandfather's memory, and in doing so, she had severed the thin wire she had been walking. Now she was in free fall. She sat at the table, her grandfather's watch clutched in her hand, and finally allowed a single dry sob to tear itself from her throat. It was the sound of the last gear in a complex, overburdened machine finally shearing off its teeth. Across town, in a penthouse apartment that seemed to exist in a different atmosphere, the incident was already being polished into a more palatable narrative. "You would not believe the audacity," Serena was saying into her phone, pacing across a floor of imported Italian marble. "This waitress, this nobody, starts lecturing me on clocks of all things. I had to put her in her place. She was completely unhinged." Her act of petty, vicious cruelty was already being reframed as a necessary defense of the social order. But the story wasn't hers to control. It hadn't been a busboy with a smartphone. It had been Jean-Luc, the restaurant's 60-year-old sommelier, a man who had seen generations of new money and old money pass through those doors. He had admired Monica's quiet competence and her genuine, rare humility. He had seen the entire sordid exchange, from Serena's sneer to the deliberate, vicious flick of her wrist, and he had seen the astonishing, quiet dignity of Monica's response. He hadn't recorded it. That would have been vulgar. Instead, after his shift, he made a phone call. It was to a discreet number he kept for emergencies, the direct line to the head of security for a man he had served for 20 years, a man he knew to be a connoisseur of 2 things: vintage Calatrava watches and unvarnished truth. At 55, Damian Hale was a man who seemed to have been forged rather than born. His office atop the Hale Dynamics Tower was less a room than a statement of intent: brushed steel, black granite, and a single floor-to-ceiling panoramic window that presented the city not as a home, but as a schematic. He had built his empire not with an inheritance, but with a patent for a gyroscopic stabilizer, a small business loan, and a work ethic that treated sleep as a strategic retreat. The skin on his knuckles was still rough. He loved his daughter, but it was a love strained by a deep and abiding disappointment. He had given Serena everything he had never had: the finest schools, limitless funds, a life devoid of friction. In doing so, he feared he had created a perfect, polished, hollow Fabergé egg. She mimicked his decisiveness, but possessed none of his underlying substance. She saw his success as an ATM, not a testament. He learned about the incident at the Luminous Pearl not from a gossip blog, but from a single encrypted text message that woke him at 5:15 a.m. It was from his head of security, a former Mossad agent named Elias Vance. The message was simple: incident at Luminous Pearl, Serena involved, potential brand exposure, awaiting your instructions. Damian called him immediately. Elias recounted the sommelier's story, his voice a flat, dispassionate monotone, relating the events and, most critically, Monica's exact words. Damian listened in silence, his eyes closed, his hand resting on a glass display case on his desk. Inside, nestled on black silk, was a 1952 Patek Philippe perpetual calendar chronograph, a machine of impossible complexity and timeless beauty. He heard the words, Bah, a beautiful, expensive, and ultimately empty case. A cold, heavy certainty settled in his gut. It wasn't simple anger at his daughter's behavior. It was a profound, sickening sense of failure. This was his legacy, a dynasty of public humiliation and arrogance. His reaction, however, was not merely personal. It was strategic. He was on the precipice of the most important venture of his life, Project Chimera. It was a move into the ultra-luxury market, a new subsidiary that would create bespoke, technologically advanced items that honored old-world craftsmanship. The flagship product was to be a line of heirloom-quality smartwatches, combining classic Swiss tourbillon movements with his company's patented biometric AI. It was a fusion of the past and the future. To launch it, he was in the final stages of a partnership with the legendary and notoriously difficult Vacheron Constantin Artisan House in Switzerland. The deal hinged on a single word: authenticity. The Swiss valued heritage and integrity above all else. A story about the Hale heiress publicly demonstrating her contempt for craftsmanship and her ignorance of value versus price. It wouldn't just be embarrassing. It could be fatal to the deal. It would confirm every caricature of the brutish, uncultured American tech baron. His daughter wasn't just a disappointment. She was a 9-figure liability. A beautifully dressed torpedo aimed directly at the hull of his new flagship. The time for indulgence, for hope, for excuses, was over. He pressed the intercom on his desk, his voice a low growl. Elias. I want a complete file on the waitress, Monica Fletcher. Address, family, work history, financials, everything. On my desk in 1 hour. Already underway, sir. And Elias, Damian added, his voice dropping, taking on the cold, hard edge that had terrified corporate rivals for 3 decades. Get me the keys to the company penthouse downtown, the one we keep for visiting executives, and find a courier. We're making a delivery. 50 minutes later, the file on Monica Fletcher glowed on his screen. He saw the photo, a young woman with intelligent, weary eyes. He saw the address in the rundown neighborhood. He saw the mountain of medical debt. And then he saw the line that made the air freeze in his lungs. Grandfather, Emile Fletcher. Deceased. Occupation, horologist and master watchmaker. Immigrated from France, 1958. Proprietor, Fletcher & Sons Horology. Closed 2022. Damian Hale stared at the words. The universe, which he had long believed to be a chaotic system of inputs and outputs, suddenly felt like a perfectly calibrated, Swiss-made machine. A strange, audacious, and terrifyingly perfect idea began to form in his mind. It was a gamble of epic proportions, born of crisis and opportunity, but it felt like the only move on the board. He looked at the Patek Philippe on his desk, then he looked back at Monica Fletcher's face on the screen. He was not just going to fix a problem, he was going to acquire an asset. The knock on Monica's apartment door was sharp, precise, and authoritative. She opened it, expecting her landlord with another threat of eviction. Instead, she found a man who seemed to take up more space than his physical form, a man who radiated a gravitational field of pure, undiluted power. He was dressed in a dark, impeccably tailored suit that whispered, rather than shouted, its expense. His hair was iron grey, his face a landscape of disciplined lines. His eyes were the same shade of winter sky as his daughter's, but where hers held petulant storms, his held the cold, clear stillness of the stratosphere. "Miss Monica Fletcher?" he asked. His voice was quiet, yet it seemed to vibrate in the very plaster of the walls. "My name is Damian Hale. I am Serena's father." Monica's blood turned to ice. She instinctively tried to slam the door, a futile gesture against a man who could probably buy the entire building with the change in his pocket. "I have nothing to say to you." "I'm not here to threaten you," he said, holding up a hand, not to stop the door, but as a gesture of disarming calm. "And I'm not here to apologize. An apology is a word. Words are cheap. My daughter has incurred a debt, and I am here to see it paid." He held out a sleek, black leather folio. Monica stared at it, bewildered, half expecting it to contain a lawsuit or a non-disclosure agreement. "A job?" she whispered, the word tasting alien in her mouth. "No, Miss Fletcher," Damian Hale said, his eyes intense, analytical, as if he were studying the workings of a complex new machine. "I believe you have misheard me. I am not offering you a job. I am offering you a division." He opened the folio. Inside, nestled on dark grey suede, was not a contract, but a set of gleaming, strangely shaped keys and a platinum credit card. "This is the key to the Hale Dynamics corporate penthouse on the 58th floor of the Olympian Tower. It is yours, along with a stipend to cover any and all incidentals, for as long as you require it. Your grandfather's debts have already been settled. An alert should have reached your phone a few minutes ago." Monica fumbled for her phone. A bank notification glowed on the screen. A single payment had been made, an amount so large it seemed like a string of random numbers. The debt was gone. The mountain had vanished. She felt dizzy, the sudden absence of that immense pressure making the room tilt. "What? What is this?" she stammered, looking from the keys to the impassive man in her doorway. "Charity? Hush money?" "Neither," Hale said flatly. "This is a signing bonus. I am building a new legacy, Miss Fletcher. Project Chimera. We are going to build the most advanced, most beautifully crafted timepieces the world has ever seen. We will fuse my company's technology with the soul of true horology. But my people, for all their brilliance, only understand circuits and code. They don't understand the soul. You do." He looked past her, into her small, clean apartment, his eyes landing on a framed photograph on the wall. It was her grandfather, Emile, his face wizened and kind, a watchmaker's loop perched on his forehead. "Your grandfather was a legend. I own 2 of his pieces." He understood that a watch is not a machine for telling time. It is a testament to our fight against it. It is a container for legacy. He looked back at her, his gaze locking onto hers with an unnerving intensity. "You are not the help, Miss Fletcher. You are the inheritance. I am not giving you a gift. I am making an investment. I need you to be the custodian of my new company's soul. You will lead the new Hale Legacy Division. You will answer only to me." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the shabby hallway. "My daughter's re-education, by the way, has also begun. Her credit is cut off, her access to the family jet revoked. She is on a commercial flight to Geneva. She will spend the next year as an unpaid apprentice at the workbench of a man who makes watch dials by hand. He is 80 years old and he does not tolerate fools. She will learn the meaning of craftsmanship, or she will be disinherited. I build things, Miss Fletcher. I will not have my life's work defined by someone who only knows how to break them." Monica stared at him, her mind a maelstrom of shock, suspicion, and a dizzying, terrifying hope. The world had not just tilted on its axis. It had been reinvented. This was a dream, a trap, a fantasy. But then she looked at the keys in the folio. They weren't just keys to a penthouse. They were the keys that could unlock the prison of debt that had been her life. This wasn't just a job offer. It was a chance to give her grandfather's legacy a future, to make his life's work matter on a scale she could never have imagined. She looked at the photograph of Emile on her wall, and for the first time in a year, she felt not the pain of his loss, but the strength of his spirit. Her voice, when she found it, was steady. "When do I start?" The first month was a dislocation, a violent transplant from one ecosystem to another. The Olim. The Olympian Tower was not a home, it was an atmospheric layer. From the 58th floor, the city ceased to be a place of noise and struggle, of diesel fumes and desperation. It became an abstraction, a silent, glittering circuit board laid out on black velvet. In the first weeks, Monica would stand before the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, her grandfather's watch a cold, familiar weight on her wrist, and feel a profound vertigo that had nothing to do with the height. She had not ascended. She had been displaced. The crushing gravity of her debt was gone, but its absence had left a vacuum. In the sterile, echoing silence of the apartment, a space curated by an invisible designer for a life she didn't know how to lead, the ghosts of her past had more room to roam. The phantom scent of Emile's pipe tobacco, the imagined creak of his workshop chair, the remembered terror in the fine print of a final notice. These things were more real to her than the imported marble beneath her feet. Wealth, she discovered, was not a release from anxiety, but merely a change in its texture. The fear of falling was replaced by the fear of being a fraud. Her office at Hale Dynamics was another rarefied atmosphere, a pressurized environment of ambition and intellect. Damian Hale's executive team were predators, sleek and formidable, their minds honed to a razor's edge by Ivy League institutions and a lifetime of winning. They moved through the corporate world with the frictionless grace of sharks, and they circled Monica with a polite, bloodless curiosity. To them, she was not the head of the new legacy division. She was the custodian, a sentimental whim of a notoriously unsentimental man. She was a curiosity, a living anecdote, a waitress plucked from obscurity. They waited for her to fail, not with malice, but with the calm certainty of mathematicians awaiting the inevitable conclusion of a flawed equation. Monica met their condescension with a ferocious, monastic devotion to the work. She did not engage in their power lunches or their casual boardroom sparring. She retreated into the archives, into the labs, into the very heart of Damian Hale's empire. He had given her a key, but she was determined to map the entire fortress, to understand its foundations, its weaknesses, its soul, or its lack thereof. She spent weeks immersed in the schematics for Project Chimera. The technology was breathtaking, a symphony of microengineering and predictive AI. The watch was a marvel of data collection, a biometric scanner that could monitor its wearer's life with unnerving precision. But as she studied the blueprints and held the cold, lifeless prototypes, a deep unease settled within her. The project was Damian Hale in miniature, powerful, brilliant, efficient, and utterly devoid of warmth. It was a monument to control, a device for quantifying life, not celebrating it. His engineers spoke of algorithms and processing power. Monica thought of the patient, imperfect rhythm of a human heart, a rhythm that could not be optimized. The conflict came to a head not in a boardroom, but in the quiet of Damian's vast, sterile office late one Tuesday night. He had summoned her. On his desk, between them, lay the flagship prototype of the Chimera. "The Swiss partners are pleased with the technical integration," he stated, his voice the low rumble of a perfectly tuned engine. "Marcus Thorne has a multi-platform marketing strategy ready to deploy. We are on schedule. You have been quiet, Miss Fletcher. I do not pay for silence." Monica looked at the device on the desk. It was beautiful, a marvel of black ceramic and sapphire crystal. Its face displayed a complex series of rings and numbers, a dashboard for the human body. "You're not selling a watch, Mr. Hale," she said, her voice steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. This was not a performance for his executives. This was the real test. "You're selling a very expensive life support monitor. You're selling a constant reminder of one's own mortality." A flicker of something, annoyance, perhaps surprise, crossed his features. "I am selling efficiency, legacy, the ability to master one's own time." "No," she countered, leaning forward, her hands flat on the cold granite of his desk. "You can't master time. That's the entire point. It's bigger than us. All we can do is honor it." "My grandfather. He used to say that a watchmaker's job is not to conquer time, but to build a beautiful, honest vessel to carry a small piece of it. This," she gestured to the prototype, "has no honesty. It has data, it doesn't tell a story, it presents a diagnosis. People don't pass down a diagnosis to their children." Damian Hale stared at her, his winter sky eyes analytical, unblinking. He was not a man who tolerated dissent. He was a man who crushed it. Monica felt the terrifying sensation of the ground giving way beneath her feet, the same freefall she'd felt after being fired. "What then?" he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Would you propose? We change the entire philosophy," she said, her own voice gaining strength from the conviction of her words. "We stop selling data and we start selling poetry. The biometric information shouldn't be a series of numbers. It should be an experience. The dial, it shouldn't be a screen. It should be a canvas. Imagine, Mr. Hale, a dial that doesn't show you your heart rate as 72 beats per minute, but instead displays a tiny photorealistic hummingbird, its wings beating in perfect sync with your own heart. Imagine a sleep tracker that doesn't give you a graph, but shows a moonflower on the dial that slowly blooms through the night, its petals unfurling in accordance with the depth and quality of your rest. We don't give them numbers to analyze. We give them a small, private piece of art that lives and breathes with them. We give them a secret." She was breathless when she finished. The silence that followed was absolute, stretching for an eternity. She had not merely criticized his project. She had criticized him, his entire worldview, his obsession with control and quantifiable success. He picked up the prototype, his large, capable hands turning it over and over, studying it as if seeing it for the first time. "A hummingbird," he murmured, the word sounding alien in his mouth. He looked up, and for the first time, Monica saw past the CEO. She saw a man who had built an empire, but was perhaps only now realizing he hadn't built a home. It's inefficient. It's whimsical. It's human, she replied. That's the only legacy that matters. He placed the prototype back on the desk with a quiet finality. Redraw the entire user interface architecture. You have full authority. Ben from R&D will be reassigned to your division. Report back to me in 1 month. He paused, his gaze intense. Do not disappoint me, custodian. He used the executive's mocking nickname, but the irony was gone. In his mouth it sounded like a coronation. The next 6 months were a blur of creation. Monica and Ben's small team worked like artisans possessed, transforming the chimera from a cold data engine into something with a soul. They designed dozens of living dials, translating the cold language of biometrics into the visual poetry of nature and art. The project was no longer Damian's monument. It was becoming Monica's testament. She poured all the love and reverence her grandfather had taught her into the lines of code and the pixels of light. And then, one Monday morning, the world tilted again. She arrived at her office to find a young woman waiting for her, perched awkwardly on the edge of a designer chair. Her hair was pulled back severely. Her clothes were simple and well-made, but unadorned. There was no jewelry, no emerald green sequins, but the face, thinner and marked by a new, unfamiliar weariness, was unmistakable. It was Serena Hale. Monica froze in the doorway, her every muscle tensing for a fight that was a year old but felt as raw as yesterday. Serena stood up, her movement stiff. The arrogant fire in her eyes was gone, replaced by something more complicated, a banked ember of resentment mixed with a brittle, watchful uncertainty. "What are you doing here?" Monica's voice was flat, colder than she intended. "My father sent me," Serena said. Her voice, once a weapon of casual cruelty, was now quiet, subdued. "He said the project needed my input." The last 2 words were delivered with a self-deprecating bitterness. "Your input?" "I'm a designer now, apparently," Serena said, a ghost of her old smirk touching her lips before vanishing. She held out her hands. They were not the perfectly manicured hands that had flung wine at Monica. The nails were short, and the skin around them was calloused, with faint, healing nicks. "I spent a year polishing screws and learning how to bevel bridges under the tutelage of a man who thinks talking is an unnecessary extravagance. I learned how to draw, to design." Damian had not just sent his daughter for re-education. He was now forcing her into an apprenticeship under the very woman she had tried to destroy. It was a move of breathtakingly calculated cruelty, or perhaps of desperate hope. He was forcing his past and his future to reconcile, with Monica as the unwilling fulcrum. Their first weeks together were a torment of unspoken words. The air between them was thick with the memory of splashed wine and public humiliation. Serena was a ghost at the table, observing meetings, offering timid suggestions that were mostly ignored, flinching whenever Monica addressed her directly. Monica, in turn, treated her with a frigid, professional distance. She was her boss. She would not be her friend. She would not grant her the comfort of forgiveness. The breakthrough came during a crisis. A crucial component of the watch, the clasp mechanism, was proving to be a design nightmare. It was either elegant and insecure, or secure and brutally ugly. The engineering team was stumped. One evening, after a long, fruitless meeting, Monica stayed late, staring at the holographic display, cycling through the failed designs. She was so focused she didn't hear Serena enter the room until she spoke, her voice hesitant. "The problem is the release. It's a single point of pressure. It creates an imbalance in the aesthetic." Monica looked up, annoyed by the intrusion. We've tried a dual-button release. It's too bulky. No, Serena said, stepping closer to the display. For the first time, Monica saw a spark of genuine passion in her eyes. Not buttons. It's a horological problem. Think of a retrograde complication. A spring that builds and releases tension along a curve. Her hands moved in the air, sketching an invisible shape. She picked up a stylus and, on a blank part of the display, began to draw. Her hand moved with a surprising, innate grace. The lines she drew were clean, confident. She sketched a clasp that didn't have buttons, but a hidden, rotating internal ring, much like the bezel on a diver's watch. A gentle twist and press would disengage a series of tiny, interlocking pins simultaneously. It was complex, innovative, and beautiful. It was a design born from a year spent contemplating the miniature, intricate world of watch movements. Monica stared at the drawing, her mind reeling. It was brilliant. It was the solution, and it had come from the last person on Earth she had expected. "Where did you learn to do that?" she asked, her voice softer now. "Antoine, the old man in the workshop. He never said much," Serena replied, her eyes still on her drawing. "But he would leave books on my bench. Books by George Daniels, Abraham Louis Breguet. I read them. At first it was just to pass the time. Then I started to understand. It's not about gears and springs. It's about solving problems with elegance. He said God sees the underside of the dial. He said there's no such thing as an unimportant part." She looked up at Monica, her gaze direct, vulnerable. "That screw I polished for 10 hours. I thought it was a punishment. It wasn't. It was the first lesson." In that moment, the dynamic between them shifted, a silent click as a final gear fell into place. Monica no longer saw the arrogant heiress. She saw a fellow builder, a different kind, one who had started with everything and had to be stripped down to nothing to find her purpose, but a builder nonetheless. "Let's make a prototype," Monica said, and the ice between them finally, irrevocably, broke. The Hail Chimera launched on a crisp autumn evening in New York, a year and a half after Monica had walked out of the luminous pearl. The event was the talk of the industry. The watch was hailed as a masterpiece, a paradigm shift. Monica stood backstage, listening to the roar of the crowd. She wore a simple dark dress, and on her wrist, her grandfather's watch felt warm against her skin. Damian Hale was on stage delivering his keynote. He spoke of his vision, of technology, of the future. Then he paused. "But visions are nothing without execution," he said, his voice carrying a new, uncharacteristic humility. And my vision was incomplete. It was cold. It lacked a heart. The heart of this project, its very soul, was brought to us by 2 women. One who understood the value of legacy because she had to fight to preserve it, and one who learned the value of craftsmanship because she was forced to build it with her own 2 hands. He didn't call them to the stage. It wasn't his style, but it was a public acknowledgement more profound than any applause. Later at the reception, Monica found Serena by a window overlooking the city. She was holding the final version of the watch, turning it over in her hands, her thumb stroking the clasp she had designed. "He finally sees me," Serena said quietly, not looking at Monica. "Not as an asset or a liability, just me." "He sees what you built," Monica corrected gently. Serena finally looked at her. "No, he sees what we built." She held out the watch. "The first one is yours. It's only right." Monica hesitated. Then she took it. The ceramic was cool and smooth. She unclasped her grandfather's watch and laid it in her palm. The old steel case was scratched. The crystal faded. It was a map of a life well lived. She then clasped the chimera onto her other wrist. On its dial, a tiny, impossibly detailed hummingbird beat its wings in perfect time with her own steady heart. One was the past, the anchor, the root of her truth. The other was the future, a future she hadn't been given, but had forged in a crucible of grief, humiliation, and improbable alliance. They were not opposing forces. They were a perfect, balanced escapement, ticking in harmony. Across the room, she saw Damian Hale watching them. He wasn't looking at the investors or the press. He was looking at his daughter and the former waitress, who had, against all odds, saved his legacy by teaching him it wasn't something you could build alone. He raised his glass, not to Monica, but to both of them. A silent, final acknowledgement. Monica felt a profound, quiet peace settle over her. She had not been rescued from her life. She had been given the tools to rebuild it. The penthouse, the title, the money. They were scaffolding. The real structure was the knowledge, hard-won and indelible, that value was not a price tag. It was the story a thing could tell. And her story was just beginning.